From the studios of Warrantech North, Jeffco Public Schools presents Building Bright Futures, a Jeffco podcast with Superintendent Dan McMinimee.
Good day, this is Jeffco Schools Superintendent Dan McMinimee bringing you our next episode of our podcast, Building Bright Futures. Through these podcasts, we want to engage parents, staff, and students in our community in conversations about important topics in Jeffco schools. In today's episode, we will chat with our Human Resources Officer, Amy Weber, who will talk about compensation. This is a critically important topic as we continue to work to attract and retain the best and brightest teachers in our classrooms. Amy, thanks for joining us today. Can you give us a little background on your work in Jeffco schools?
Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here. I've been with Jeffco now almost 9 years in my same position, running the Human Resources Department. I like to think I have the best job in the district, but I'm sure there's others in the district that would contend that their job is better. Prior to Jeffco, I had worked at another large school district for about 10 years, also in human resources.
Well, thanks for joining us again, Amy, today. Before we dive into this topic, I'd like to set the stage by talking about the funding we have to meet all of our needs in Jeffco schools. Here are some facts about Jeffco schools that I gleaned off of the CDE website. First of all, we get multiple types of funding. We get state funding, we get mill levy overrides, we get bond packages, and there's also grants. I'm going to speak specifically about the funding that we get from the state of Colorado. So in Jeffco, we get about $7,100 per student for next year to fund all of our needs. That's comparable to other school districts. In case you didn't know, Douglas County Schools gets about $7,000, Littleton gets about $7,000, we get about $7,100, Boulder gets about $7,200, Cherry Creek gets about $72,500, and Denver gets $76,300. So when you take those numbers and look at the effect on school districts, the story is not very rosy. In Jefferson County Schools, if we got the same funding as Denver got, we would have about $45 million more than we currently have. If we got the same funding as Cherry Creek gets, we would have about $11.8 million more per year. So I just wanted to make sure our listeners understood that it is not all equal when we start talking about funding from the state of Colorado. When you put on mill levy overrides and you put on bond dollars in there as well, that makes a tremendous difference in the amount of money that a school district has to direct toward the things that they need to purchase, being resources for students, capital needs that they may have, or compensation. So within the context of that, I would like to run down some questions with Ms. Weber regarding compensation, but I just wanted our listeners to understand that there is a difference in funding from the state perspective. So that said, Amy, we have some positive news about compensation here in Jeffco. Can you talk a little bit more about the compensation increases that Jeffco teachers will receive this year?
Sure. I have to tell you first, though, I'm drooling over those numbers because $11 million would provide a 2% pay increase for every single employee in Jeffco, and we would like nothing more than to be able to have those dollars to be able to use them accordingly. But this year, what we were able to do, given the increases that we did receive, and a lot of our funding that we received did in fact end up going to compensation. So for this upcoming school year, 80% of the new funds that we received from the state are going to compensation. The challenges, as we'll hear as we go through this conversation, is that there were some other priorities that we had to fund in addition to salaries that people see in their paychecks. So for our teachers, there's two components to pay increases. One component is what I would call a rebalancing to make sure that our teachers who've been here through some of the lean years are in fact making as much as what our new hires are coming in as. And that's going to impact about 1,100 of our teachers this year. The balance of our teachers are going to participate in a compensation increase that's going to be attached to their evaluation rating, but is on average 1%, which is the amount that we were able to give to all of our employees across Jeffco.
So when we talk about compensation, we're not only talking about salary, but we're also talking about additional pieces. Can you tell us some other components that go into compensation?
Sure. Within the human resources language, we often talk about total compensation, which is the total amount that an employee would receive from their employer. And so the base salary is obviously important, and that's what people see bottom line when they get their paychecks and they have to pay their grocery bills and their housing bills. And so that's an important critical factor. But in addition to that, Jeffco contributes a significant amount to the state retirement system on behalf of our employees. It's right now now over 18%. So any employee in Jeffco could in fact take their annual salary, multiply that by 18%, and add those two numbers together to come up with an estimation of what their total compensation from Jeffco is. The challenge we have with that is that those use up significant dollars in our budget. So for this year alone, we contributed $10 million to PARA and Affordable Care Act. And we can certainly talk in more detail about both those things if you're interested. But we do contribute more than just the base salary to people's paychecks. And it's important that we begin to talk in terms of total compensation and what that means.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really interesting as I've looked at this is there's some choices that Jeffco has made, as all districts do, regarding compensation in terms of medical plans, benefits, things like that. You know, some school districts choose one plan to go with, and that costs less. The cost of that choice is sometimes an additional couple $1 million that you can't turn into compensation for staff. So I think it's really important to talk about total compensation when you're talking about the big picture with staff. My understanding is that this district is picking up additional PARA and Affordable Care Act costs. Can you explain what some of those costs are and where that money comes from?
Sure. So within the PARA increases this year from our budget, that is an additional that's an additional $3.2 million that we would have otherwise had available to pay into compensation for our employees. And the Affordable Care Act is costing us an additional $3 million. What that means is the state of Colorado has increased the percentage that we have to contribute to PARA, the state retirement system, on behalf of our employees. And that has been going up over a number of years and will continue to go up for additional years. So future dollars are going to have to fund the PARA increase as well. So employees don't see that in their paychecks, and that's what's, I think, frustrating to our employees. The Affordable Care Act, again, as a district, we had a different structure around our benefits than some of our surrounding jurisdictions. There's between 600 and 800 Jeffco staff who have come on the rolls and are now eligible for health care based on the Affordable Care Act. But there's a cost to that. The district pays $515 a month towards full-time benefit costs for our employees. And so those individuals who are newly eligible for health care are getting that benefit. We're estimating that that cost could run as high as $3 million this year, although we're watching those numbers closely.
Those are some really big numbers we're talking about, but I hope our listeners remember that we have 154 schools, 86,000 kids, thousands of employees, so the numbers add up really quickly when we start talking about compensation. We're going to take a quick break and hear more about what's happening in Jeffco schools.
Are you excited to start 6th grade? Yes.
The crowds are out the door here at the old Stevens Elementary, where Jeffco families working through very tight budgets are getting a little bit of help with back-to-school supplies.
You guys are amazing, thank you.
The Jeffco Action Center and Jeffco Public Schools teamed up for this distribution day to help Jeffco students at every grade level. Barbara Penning is the Action Center's Director of Volunteer Programs.
It's their spirals, it's their paper, it's their pens, pencils, crayons, scissors, glue sticks, all the basic things that you need to start school. We just hit a drop in the bucket, and we have to get beyond that as a community so that kids can start and feel good about the learning process, and they don't have to feel embarrassed.
Watch the full story now on JPS-TV, Jeffco's official YouTube channel, a place where you can discover your district.
Jefferson Public Schools, building bright futures.
Thank you for staying here with us. We have Amy Weber here. She's the Chief Human Resources Officer at Jeffco Schools, and I'm Jeffco Schools Superintendent Dan McMinimee. We are talking to Amy today about teacher compensation, which is critically important as we ensure that every student at Jeffco Schools graduates career and college ready. Amy, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
So diving back into teacher compensation, this year, Jeffco Schools also increased the starting salaries for new teachers entering the district. How much do they make, and why did the district believe that this was important?
So I'm going to take us back a couple falls, or one fall from now, and kind of do a series of two increases that we've done for our newest teachers. There's been a number of years during which we've had conversations with JCA and district staff around what we pay our incoming teachers. And we've known for some time that our salary schedule, which is what we used to be on, was out of alignment with surrounding jurisdictions, and that we needed to address starting salaries for teachers. An example for our listeners is if we hired a teacher under the previous system with no experience and a bachelor's degree, they would have come in making about $33,000. And we knew that we needed to get closer to 38 or even as high as 40K with that number. And so last fall, that was increased to 38K, so that there would not be any teachers working in Jeffco that made less than 38,000. We followed that up with some additional changes to address teachers that we would hire who brought years of experience with them. And so this past spring, we thoughtfully went through and looked at who we're hiring and the years of experience they're bringing, and devised an approach that provides our incoming teachers with salaries above $38,000 if they in fact are bringing experience with them. There's another layer to that, and that's what happens with our teachers who are already here. So this spring, we partnered with JCA to develop a memorandum of understanding for our, and that's sort of, I guess, negotiations talk for an agreement that we have with our association about what that looks like for our current teachers. And so my team has been busy all summer identifying which teachers have fallen behind our new hires based upon some years where we were not able to give any raises. So those teachers are going to, in fact, see an increase that exceeds the average for the rest of the district as we try and catch people up with some of these new teacher salaries. I hope that wasn't too detailed and complicated, but it's a complicated issue, and I want to do justice to the complexity.
I think what it says to me, Amy, is that there's multi-facets to this problem that we have right now, and it's not just as easy as just saying we're going to take X number of dollars and put that toward compensation and everything will be fine. I mean, there was the compounding effect of 4 years of pay freeze, along with the salary structure that we had and the one that we transitioned to, that have created some unique problems that we have to approach it from a find a problem, fix a problem, one at a time, step-by-step sequence. We can't take $27 million and remake the lost wages for staff that we've had. We would love to do that, but we can't do that right now. We're just not in that place in our system. So the other piece that I wanted to talk about that I think is really important is we have substitute teachers over the years that had endured a pay cut just like our regular staff members had. And we had a problem last year attracting substitutes and making sure that we had quality people in buildings when we had teachers out for a variety of reasons. So we took a few steps to try to mitigate some of that. But the first piece that we really wanted to talk about was increasing the pay for substitute teachers. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what the new system looks like and why we did this?
Sure. So substitute teachers took a 10% pay cut at a time when the rest of the district team took a 3% pay cut. And when the 3% was restored to the rest of the Jeffco team, substitute teacher pay was not increased. It was remained at that lower level. So what my team and I did is we put together the details around what our subpool looks like and what behaviors we want to try and encourage, and we looked at what other districts are paying. And this year, we're able to restore part of that pay cut so that our substitutes will be making $95 a day, which is an increase from $90. But on top of that, we've developed an incentive program where we want to encourage them to take jobs in Jeffco. So if a substitute accepts 40 jobs in Jeffco, they'll get an additional $300 pay component, which over the time period of those jobs would increase the pay to over $100 a day. What we know about our substitutes is we have a lot of them, and there's a few who accept a lot of jobs in Jeffco, but the significant numbers of them work between 1 and 20 days. So we wanted to come up with a way that we could attach compensation to picking up more work in Jeffco. Our subs are so critical to our work here in the district. We want to be sure that we're paying them fairly and also encouraging them to work with Jeffco.
Well, Amy, thanks again for joining us today. I know we just scratched the surface. I'm certain that I will be bringing you back to talk about compensation at a future time, but thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
That wraps up this session of our Building Bright Futures podcast. Look for us on the district website. Stay tuned for our next podcast as we keep you up to speed about the top issues in Jeffco schools. I'm Superintendent Dan McMinimee, and thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Building Bright Futures. a Jeffco podcast with Superintendent Dan McMinimee. This is a production of Jeffco Public Schools.